Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark. I'm going to be your leader, presenter for this webinar for OneNote 2013. So this is going to be a relatively short session, just covering the essentials of the tool. So why do we even need to use it, the interface, integration with Office, and basically browsing through and navigating and creating various notes of different kinds. So I'd like to welcome you to the session. So again, my name is Mark Shepard. I'm a longtime training instructor. I've been working with CTC for the past year or so, and my specialty is Microsoft Office. Primarily, I work with a lot of the major programs like Word and Excel and PowerPoint, but I also work as a OneNote specialist. And I actually started teaching OneNote around about 6 or 7 years ago, around about 2007. And I've been using it pretty extensively since then. I'm actually familiar with all major versions of OneNote from about 2003 onwards. This version is not really very different than 2010, which is what I teach probably the most frequently. And so, you know, I'm going to talk a little bit about not only what the purpose of OneNote is, but hopefully giving you some good ideas on how to use it effectively and maybe a few hints and tips. So as we go throughout the session today, not only, you know, make sure you give me your feedback and ask questions, but you may also want to keep a pen and paper handy just to take some occasional notes as we go throughout the session. So if you hear me say anything like, oh, really useful tip, you might want to make a note of this. You might want to make sure that you write those things down. So let's talk a little bit about working with OneNote. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my, my desktop so you can see pretty much everything that's going on my screen. And one thing you're going to see is that I've actually already started OneNote 2013, so I'll just simply switch over to that. Normally, when you start OneNote, what will typically happen is that you'll probably get some kind of dialog box or prompt sort of asking you to log in. So you can see here that I've already logged in to my own Hotmail or SkyDrive or Microsoft connected account. So if you have any of those kinds of accounts, certainly it's a good idea to connect to that, because not only will you be able to access your OneNote notebooks on your local drive on this computer, on your C drive, but you'll also see that if you have Microsoft OneDrive, which used to be called SkyDrive, you'll have any publicly accessible notebooks or notebooks that you can connect through, say, like say a smartphone or tablet. They are also available to you. So I have some of those notebooks open just to sort of show you a little bit what's possible with actually using the tool. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what actually goes on within OneNote. And you can see that this is actually an example of a sample notebook that's often provided with the actual tool when you first start it. When you first open OneNote, what you'll probably see is you'll see this little menu, which has kind of replaced the larger panel that used to be present on the left side of the screen. It's actually closed. But if you look at that menu, you'll actually see all the open notebooks that you have. And so you'll see that they used to be displayed as sort of like 3-ring binders. They are now actually visualized as sort of tabbed notebooks. And you'll notice that they're all largely color-coded. Now you can change any of these colors any way that you want, but they're usually built in by default. So some of these things like school and projects you'll actually see will probably be open already. And the main reason why they're there is to just sort of give you kind of an empty template with a few sections and notes inside of them to really sort of work with. So here's the good news. The good news is that when you're working with OneNote, you're not limited to working with one particular, you know, sort of digital notebook at a time. Each one of these individual notebooks have individual sections. These sections are kind of like the equivalent of what used to be the old sort of school dividers, you know, where you would actually have a physical colored area separating each of the different sheets that you physically bound in your 3-ring binder. And so whenever you right-click and add a new section, or if you click on the option to click on Home, normally there used to be individual buttons that would insert sections, but that's changed a little bit. A lot of this will largely show up when you're on your Home tab. You just simply right-click in this area near the top of where you see the name of your current workbook that your notebook that you're working on. You have the option to create a new section, right? So you can see that in this project's notebook that I have open here, there are actually already 3 sections that I've been working on. I have a project's template, candidate, we have a study notes, and we have new stuff to add. So these are things that I've just sort of customized and added for myself, and they're basically coming in from my offline version of working with OneNote. Now, if I wanted to create a new notebook from scratch, it's actually pretty easy. All I have to do is just click on the File tab, and this will usually take me to the Backstage. I have a New option, and I can either locate this on my OneDrive personal folder, which is what I've already configured, or I can normally just store it on my computer. Typically, when you're storing this on your computer, whether you have a regular PC or like a desktop or a laptop or a tablet, you'll usually see that it's stored in the C drive. And they don't really bother with actually showing you a location of where you put the notebook. You just simply type in whatever you want to call this notebook. So I might want to call this something like, I don't know, let's say I want to plan a trip. So let's say I have a spring 2015 vacation I want to plan. So typically, whenever I name my notebooks, I usually sort of give it a fairly overarching name or theme so that way I know what I want to do in here. And you can see that by default, whenever you create a brand new notebook, it creates a single blank section for you. And there's also a page inside this section. So here's a bit of a useful tip you might want to write down, right? So the notebooks themselves are actually fairly small. They're compressed. They don't take up a lot of space on your hard drive. They're largely all stored on your C drive if you store them on your computer. And I'll talk a little bit about where all of these notebooks are going in just a few minutes. But typically, you'll see that you have a notebook, and then inside of each notebook, you have many, many different sections that you can build. And then within each section, you can also add numerous pages. And you can see in here that there's a simple button called Add Page. And so within my new section 1, which I could always rename at any time, I can add as many sheets of paper or pages as I want. And you can see that they're all blank at this point. Okay, I haven't really added anything into them. I can also add new pages within these, and I can even promote these pages or demote them and create what are called subpages. So I can actually have pages inside of individual subpages. And in fact, I have 2 layers of subpages within this hierarchy. So if I was talking about OneNote as a hierarchy of items, whenever I'm actually typing in information on a page, the first thing I type in at the top is usually the title. But what's really neat about OneNote is that it's very free form. So if you're in education, typically if you're taking notes, there's 2 ways you can go about taking notes, when you're going to school, right? You can either just go ahead and use regular ruled or line paper and just, stay within the lines, or you can use the word processor, which is not bad. You could use Microsoft Word, for example. Or we could click anywhere inside of this notebook, and you'll notice that I don't have to start my notes or my typing my text right at the left-hand side of the margin. I can actually click anywhere I want, and I can say, here is a simple note for my shall we say, my notebook section called OneNote hierarchy. And of course, this is not really very good because I'm actually talking about OneNote inside of my spring 2015 vacation. Maybe I'm just going to spend my vacation talking entirely about nothing but OneNote. Okay, but it doesn't really matter. You can see that whenever you create a note, it will usually tend to create a sort of a small square, which can be clicked and moved, and you can put in as many of these little sort of small little jottings or typed elements, as many as you like. So we can say, here is another note. And I could keep typing. As I say, if I keep typing, the contents of my text will wrap off of the screen. Very simple. Okay? So, and again, you can move this. You can always go to the edge of your note. You can resize them. And you can essentially have as many of these as you want. So unlike with Word or word processor, which really structures your information into things like margins or pages, there is a concept of pages, but in terms of your page, what they call your sheet space, you actually have a lot of places where you could put this. You could actually put this all the way down here. We could actually scroll way down and make the size of this overall sheet or sheet area, the scratch area, really large. And so we have a much more freedom to move things around and sort of take rough sort of notes and sort of stick them wherever we want, right? And so in many ways, while we do have the luxury of sort of controlling where all these things go, we don't have to be very strict on how we do that, right? We have a lot of room and a lot of space to be creative and move things around and to be able to add whatever we need. And so really the key thing that I would urge you to try and get a feel for and get comfortable with is not only creating a couple of different workbooks or notebooks, but also right-clicking and creating a few sections, because unfortunately there is no way that you can have pages without sections. You have to have at least one new section, and then inside of that section, whatever you decide to call it, you can have as many pages as you want, and of course as you add more pages, you'll probably want to move them to other sections. And you can move these pages around and drag and drop them or cut and paste them and put them in other areas, right? So this is essentially really how OneNote essentially operates, okay? And so most of the time, if you'll want to be making changes to your text, you will typically click on the Home tab, and then you would just simply select your text or whatever. Normally I double click on Home and just have that turned on all the time. So if I select my text, I can just basically make some essential changes or basic changes. The one thing you'll notice about working with the Home tab is that unlike with Word, you don't have quite as many tools as you would have in that piece of software, right? You have some simple tools that allow you to do things like bold and change the color of the text if you wish, or if you want to change the background color, you could also do that also. And also you could do things like do some simple formatting and deleting and some limited indenting and bulleting. There is also a new styles section, which is available for you if you were planning on structuring your information. Normally, if you were planning on labeling things like heading 1 or heading 2, it would actually probably make more sense for you to label your title of your pages as heading 1, right? These are the sorts of things where if you were going to copy all the content into a Word document, then you can use heading 1 and heading 2 and heading 3 to organize some of the headings and subheadings of your text a little bit more easily, so that way it will pick up that formatting and you will not have to reformat or use those styles again. Okay, so really the whole idea of OneNote is, again, very simplified, very loose, somewhat relatively unstructured, but it can benefit from the larger structure of creating sections and pages and also subpages if you wanted to do that. But you don't absolutely have to do all those things if you don't want to. I mean, the vast majority of my OneNote notebooks are fairly simple, and I usually just simply put a couple of pages and a couple of sections in each one. And as I need to add more pages, I don't have to worry about buying more paper. I just add more to the individual notebook. One thing you're also going to notice about using OneNote notebooks generally is that you'll notice that there's really no save button, okay? And that's because OneNote really doesn't need it. Whenever you add something and you basically hit enter or you click away from it, OneNote will automatically save all of the content, okay? So in other words, whatever you're looking on or working at the time, OneNote will remember it. So if I go over here and if I right click on my spring 2015 vacation, I can easily close my notebook right from there. If I want to close my notebooks generally, another way I could also do it would be to go back to my File tab, my Backstage, and you can see all my open notebooks are available here too. And I could also essentially close it or access the properties or also open it up for sharing or moving it to a different location if I wanted to put it somewhere else other than the C drive. You'll notice that the vast majority of all my other notebooks are actually live off of my OneDrive live website. But this one has actually been stored in C users, my username documents, and in a preset or pre-configured directory called OneNote Notebooks. And if you did want to place these notebook files and data in a different location, there are options in the options panel that would allow you to change those locations if you wish to. Okay, so I'm not going to go into all the details of that. Normally, it actually makes good sense to not change this. But I haven't had an issue with changing it. But I'm just saying that normally I usually like to keep all these defaults set, just so I can get to them. So if I want to view that notebook, I can just click on it right away, and it automatically opens up that notebook. It sort of saves me some time having to click on an individual notebook icon. But certainly, this little panel, this drop down, has been made a little bit more compact so that way it's not always taking up all this space on the left-hand side of your screen. So I think that's actually a nice little minor improvement. It's a stylistic thing. But for those people who are used to working with older versions of OneNote, certainly that might be something that might be a little bit jarring and noticeable at first. Okay, so certainly that's something to kind of keep in mind. Okay, so in terms of the essentials, that's really what we're looking at so far. So does anyone have any questions or have any comments that they'd like to make in terms of how they're hoping to use OneNote, or any details? Or if not, I'll I'll move on and we'll talk about some different things. So I'll open this up to the Q&A just a little bit just to see if anyone has any quick questions. I'll just give everyone a moment to ponder that and see. If not, then I'll move on. Okay, so let's move on then, and we'll talk a little bit more about other aspects of working with OneNote. So I'll just share again. Hang on a second. I'm running into a bit of an issue with my sharing. Hang on. I'll share my desktop again. There we go. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about working with more detailed aspects of OneNote. So as I mentioned before, once you get beyond the basic sort of approach of building up a vacation, right? Obviously I was talking about the OneNote hierarchy, but let's say I'm actually really planning my vacation for real. So let's say I'm planning on going somewhere maybe to the south of the United States. So let's say I want to go to Nashville. Okay, so we're going to go to Nashville. So my whole idea here is that now what I might want to do is I might want to click on a general part of my page, and I might want to just talk a little bit about what I want to do generally, right? Because I haven't really sort of thought about all this much, right? All I know is I want to go there, and I want to sort of say, this page will cover or overview the basics of my intended trip to Nashville, Tennessee, USA for spring 2015. So I might want to start talking a little bit about the date. So I might want to say put in an approximate date of sometime around about mid-April 2015. Not really sure exactly when yet, but probably maybe the second or third week. And I might want to say, things to do. So where do I want to go? Right. So I might want to catch a hockey game. Might want to visit the Grand Ole Opry. See some music. Visit friends. All those sorts of things. The actual interesting thing about Nashville is that it's actually the headquarters of the Barbershop Harmony Society, which I'm actually a member in. So I sing in a local choir and I do all that good stuff. So I know a bunch of people down there. So that would probably be amongst all the many things I would probably want to do. I probably want to eat lots of food. So there's some great restaurants, lots of great restaurants there. And maybe do some Mike Fisher watching. I don't know. If you're an Ottawa Senators fans, Carrie Underwood and Mike Fisher live in Nashville, so it might be possible to catch them, do a little bit of celeb watching, all that sort of thing. So these are all the kinds of things that I might want to sort of put down because, it's very easy to sort of forget all these little details, right? You could write them down on a scrap of paper, but it's a lot better if you actually put them in a more permanent place, right? So I don't have to think about that. I have all that stuff there. So I might want to call this sort of, say, trip overview. I want to relabel that section. And then I might actually want to start looking at my travel, right? So I might want to label this something like travel hotel. And it won't let me do that, probably because I have an unusual character, like things like shifted characters like colons it won't take. So I'll just simply say hotel. I'll put that in there. I might also want to put in car rental. And I might also want to put in flight. So you'll see that as I start adding more and more of these details, if I run out of room or if the size of my window shrinks, then what may happen is that I may actually see a drop-down menu showing me where I can access all of those individual tabs, right? So I'll just relabel this. I'll call it something like overview. So now I have a much clearer picture of what's going on. I might want to click on my flight and move that first. Usually I find that the flight is one of the, first things I might want to plan out. So I might want to call it something like airline flight details. And so I might want to sort of say, okay, I might want to remind myself to visit trivago.ca to check for good deals on flights. Actually, I'm not really sure if they do a lot of airline stuff. They might be better for hotels. I'll put a question mark on that. I actually haven't been to trivago.ca, but I see all these ads about it, so I might be able to do that. Failing that, check Expedia and other airfare comparison sites. for good deals. So you never know. I mean, I might actually want to delay. I might want to also say consider going onto a waiting list. Oops, I learned to spell waiting to see if I can get a better ticket price. So, and then again, you know, also in terms of the flight specifics, right? I'd have to sort of do things like it's going to essentially go from YOW, which is the flight code for that, and SA to NSH. I'd have to put a question mark. I'm not really sure what the exact flight code is for Nashville's airport, but you know, I'll just sort of put something like that just to remind myself of where all that thing is. So this is kind of good. I can sort of put together a nice little checklist of things that I need to do in order to figure out what that is. And you know, I may also want to consider going to Flight Center, right? There are several Flight Center travel locations in Ottawa to book a flight in person. Right? Usually they have pretty good deals at Flight Center. I actually know a couple of guys at Flight Center locally here in the downtown area. So, you know, these are all just things I want to ponder for each of these items. Same thing is true with any of these, right? I mean, what's really neat about working with OneNote is that you don't necessarily have to type in all the data completely yourself. You could actually take it directly from an existing Word document. So over in here, what I'll do is I'll go back to my my main desktop on my CTC Canada computer, and I'll create like a simple Word document. So I'll call this something like a sample Word doc. I'll just open that up. So if I wanted to put together something very specific, let's say I had some details about a flight. So I might say, I'll say something like flight deal, Ottawa to Nashville, return. Let's say I get a great deal and I get my flight for something like $450, right? And then I might want to put whatever details, etc. will go here, right? And so it doesn't really sort of matter how that's sort of laid out. If I actually, you know, list all that information, format it in a certain way, like let's say I choose a particular font. So I'll change this over to, let's just use a different font for this one. I'm actually going to choose the Corbel font, which I like quite a lot. And maybe I'll, you know, change some of the formatting, right? So again, not a lot of detail on this example, but if I copy and paste any of that content right from Word, you can see that if I go into OneNote and I'm clicking on my flight, let's say I want to put something in there, I can just click on a separate area of the screen. Notice how if you click on the existing note, it will actually try and sort of add it on to what's already there. And that's very different than me clicking significantly away from that screen so that way it doesn't extend that. This is a bit tricky. One way that I actually solve that kind of a problem, rather than to put it in a separate space, is I may need to resize the existing notes a little bit, just so I can sort of get out of the way. And then as soon as I do that, then I can click beside it. If I hit Control V for paste, notice how it takes all of my exact content from Word and it retains all of its formatting, right? So that's the default. Now, if I didn't like this, bear in mind that I could actually just do an instant paste right off the top, in which case it would just try and create a space for me. Normally, if you click somewhere prior to pasting, it will try and paste whatever you have in starting at that point. Okay. Now, of course, if I had not gone through those steps, another way that I could have done this would have been to have just simply gone straight to the paste button, and you'll see that I have several options, right? I have the option to retain the source formatting, which is the default. Everything looks the same as before. I could merge Word's formatting with the formatting in OneNote, which might not work all that well. I could strip away all the formatting completely and just keep it as text. Or I could actually paste it in as a picture. But of course, if I do that, then I can't actually click on the text and sort of edit it or change it. So that might be useful if I was doing something like taking a screenshot, but it's not a feature that I use very often. More often than not, I will typically either just keep it as raw text only or keep all the source formatting right from Word, because all of that stuff is compatible. If there's paragraph formatting, it may keep it, it may not, okay? This is something that you'll see differing sorts of ways of how OneNote will take it, because remember that Word is actually a word processor, so it will do some things that won't necessarily fully get picked up by OneNote. And I think most people pretty much kind of accept that, but it's something to sort of bear in mind as you're going through and using the actual product, okay? So in terms of actually putting things together at a basic level and sort of copying back and forth, it's pretty easy. One way, of course, that you can change things is like within Excel, if you want to drag and drop and move tabs around, you can do that. You can also right-click on a particular section, and you can change its color. You'll actually see that they have I think they have about something like about 16 or 18 different colors that you can choose from. Obviously, if you have more than about 16 or 18 tabs, then you will get some repeats, right? So there won't be anything much you can do about that. But usually, most people, when they build a notebook, they usually don't tend to go much beyond this. So this usually isn't a big deal, but if I wanted to make my flight a different color, typically what I would do is I probably would try and choose a color comparable to whatever my flight is. So if I was flying maybe on WestJet, I might want to choose something like, say, a blue mist color, or maybe something that's more like an actual blue. So maybe that might not be good. Cyan might be a better color that's kind of a little closer to the coloring that you would see on WestJet. Same thing with the car rental, right? If I'm renting from budget, I might want to sort of, make that kind of like an orange color. So, these are all sort of little subtle things that I could do, but, it's not really that important. It's fairly easy to make things all the same color if you want. Okay, so in previous versions of OneNote, they tried to encourage you to make everything different colors. Now you have virtually no limit on that, so you can pretty much do whatever you want with a lot of these things. So I'll just keep that green for now. So, things that I might not know about, I might want to color code them, or if there's something that's very urgent, I might color code that in red, but you don't have to do those things if you don't want to. It's just a question of figuring out how far you want to go. There is, of course, buttons that will allow you to easily create a new section. You don't necessarily have to right-click. You can just simply click plus, and then it's just going to create a new section for you. If you don't like a section, you can always right-click and choose delete and get rid of that. Or you can merge the contents into another section. So you can usually see that when that happens, if there is a page in here and you merge with another section, it's really just going to add it onto the bottom of what's already there. Right, so we'll merge existing pages and we'll add them onto other ones. Or if there's just one page and one page, it will try and squeeze them into the same space. Or typically, it will usually put them in a separate physical page, and then you could cut and paste them into the same page if you wanted to do that. So there's nothing really too difficult or too time-consuming about this. But obviously, the more planning that you do, or the more you at least have an idea of what you're hoping to accomplish or different sections you want to build, then this whole process and the utility, the usefulness of it, will probably be a lot helpful for you. So what I find is helpful for me as an exercise is that if I really have no idea at all what to label all these things, then sometimes I may actually just back away from my computer and just go to a regular sheet of paper and just sort of sketch out on a piece of paper in bullet form what it is I want to store in this notebook. And sometimes I find that that's very helpful in helping me to arrive at what I think would be good labels that sort of apply to this kind of this approach, right? So I do like to try and use overarching subjects that can contain a number of things, so that way I can build individual pages on those details, right? So I have one page over here. Currently it's untitled. I can actually right-click on this and rename it and title it from there. So I might actually want to call it something like hotel. Maybe I have a Delta that I want to go to in Nashville. So I might want to say Delta plus details. And so then in here, I would say details to add about Delta downtown Nashville hotel. So anything for planning, like whether it's planning a meal or a wedding or a trip. I usually find that trips or actually even buying something, like doing research on a product. Maybe I'm trying to figure out a new computer that I want to buy, and I want to be able to sort of have different pages or tabs and things to compare the benefits and drawbacks of different aspects of what I'm doing. These are all good examples of things that would make very powerful and effective uses of the tool, right? So it's really just a question of, what is in your imagination, that you might want to consider, okay, for each of those aspects. So there's a couple of questions. So one question is, are you able to copy an Outlook calendar item attachment into OneNote as an icon if your suite is Citrix-based? I'm not too sure about that. I may have to do some research on that one. I do know that there is a certain degree of functionality in terms of connecting with Outlook. The functionality is less so much in terms of to do with the calendars per se. What you could probably do, Karen, just off the top of my head, is that the next time you're in Outlook, regardless of version, like I'm thinking version 2010 or later, you could probably just go in and copy the details. But whether or not you can actually copy that in as an icon, that I'm not so sure about. I'd have to look into that, particularly with the Citrix space, because that would limit what you can do in terms of things like object linking and embedding. So I'm not quite so sure off the top. I'll have to look into that and see what I can do about that. Okay, so but certainly that's a very good question. One thing you'll notice that when you're in other areas of your computer is if you click over down here on your close to your status tray, right, your system area of your taskbar, you'll probably notice that there's this really interesting little icon called Send to OneNote Tool. And so the whole idea of that is that if we right-click on that tool, you'll see we have an option called Send to OneNote Tool, or more importantly, there's an option called New Quick Note. And what I really like about the Quick Note option is that when you're using it, you can easily create a single note that doesn't necessarily belong to a notebook. So I could actually type in something, say, oh, reminders for work later this week, etc. So I might want to put in my information and then see all those details. Now, of course, when we're looking at all that, right, we want to make sure that we see what's going on. So I'm just going to reshare that, and I'll show you that again. Sorry about that. I think I have my sharing turned off, so I'll just show you that again. So here's my actual Send to OneNote in my little system tray. We just click on that. And if we create a new quick note, it will create a new small work area, very similar to the size of a real one. No, I'm sharing. I know. I just turned it back on. Sorry about that. Yeah. So, now that I've created that note, now I can just go ahead and I can type it in. Now notice, of course, that this doesn't really belong to anything, right? So I might be able to say check schedule, update courses and webinars, update invoicing, check with students. Right, so these are just different things that I do as part of my job. When I close down that quick OneNote, you're going to see it says it's been placed in your quick notes. And you might be wondering, well, wait a minute, where did my quick notes go? Wouldn't it just make more sense to automatically prompt me to put it somewhere in one of my existing notebooks? Well, actually, your quick notes are actually right down here. So if you've ever used OneNote before, you probably noticed that there is this sort of quick notes, or what they sometimes refer to as unfiled notes, right at the bottom of this list. And when you click on them, any of the various notes that you're working on, whether they're on the online version or the local version on your computer, on your desktop, they're all displayed here. Okay, so here's all of your content. And then if I wanted to take all this stuff, I could actually select everything from this note and just either cut or copy it, and then go back over to one of my other things. Let's say I want to create a work notebook. I don't have one. So I'll click on File New, and I'll create a new notebook called Work. Create that notebook. And it says, would you like to share it? I'll say not now. Normally, whenever I create a workbook, typically I do not want to share it, because if I share it, what I'm really doing is I'm opening it up for other people to be able to not only view the content, but also to potentially edit and change that content, which is really useful if I wanted to share it with, say, other members of my family, or say, say my girlfriend, and then obviously I would want her to look at what I'm doing and then either add to whatever I have, or optionally allow her to change or replace some of that. Normally I just simply say not now, creates the new work notebook. If I click in a blank space where I can create that note, I can hit Control V, and there's that note copied over perfectly from the quick note that I just simply created off of the taskbar and transferred over into my new work notebook, right? So I might want to call it something like upcoming reminders, and I might want to say, so I might want to call it something like day-to-day business. So there's a nice sort of structure for everything that I'm working, right? So now that I've sort of given that some thought, I now have a place to put all these little reminders. Or I could just leave them in the unfiled notes or the quick notes bin, and they'll just stay there, right? They'll stay there for however long. It doesn't delete them. It's just going to retain those for however long that you wish to keep them there. So you could actually just keep adding quick notes. The only problem is, though, is that if you don't occasionally go in here and check and see what you might have filed, you might actually be missing a lot of information that you could probably put in a more appropriate place in one of these various sort of notebooks that we have, right? So as I said, notebooks can contain lots of different things. It's just a question of deciding where you're going to go with them. Now, before we sort of run out of time, I want to talk a little bit about a few other additional features above and beyond just simply, putting in the text and setting up the structure, because that's pretty easy. On the Insert tab, you'll see that there's a number of different things that you can add to your notes for a structure. So if you've ever used tables before in things like Microsoft Word, again, it's pretty comparable. It's not as detailed as Word tables, but tables do provide a nice layout for you to essentially put in some simple limited numbers, kind of like a crude Excel spreadsheet. If you do have Excel spreadsheets, you can actually insert them as a native link, okay? And so if you actually have the Excel spreadsheet, you actually will see an icon for this, and you can even double click on that and you can edit the content of the Excel spreadsheet inside of OneNote, which is pretty impressive. I'll try that out in just a minute. If you have Visio, you can also add Visio diagrams and do essentially the same thing. And you can actually do some basic edits of those as well. I don't actually recommend doing that because Visio is a pretty detailed tool, which I teach extensively, and there's a lot of things that actually would make more sense to edit and update and maintain in the full version of the product. But it is possible to be able to do it within OneNote, and actually it has been so for the last couple of versions. So it's an interesting option, but it's not something that I normally make a big point of. A lot of the time, if you have graphics or pictures already saved as files, you'll probably want to insert pictures of things, especially if you're planning on a vacation and you want to sort of put in pictures of places that you want to go, or optionally pictures of hotels, and certainly hotels are a great option for that. But sometimes when you go to hotel websites, if you right-click on a picture of that hotel, it may not allow you to save it as a picture just because of the way it's set up. It could be set up using a Flash component or something that is difficult to capture. If that's the case, you might want to make a note of an interesting tool over here called the screen clipping tool. What the screen clipping tool will allow you to do is it will allow you to open up a web browser, and then you can sort of draw and sort of map out a square or a sort of a physical area that it will actually take a picture of, and it will transform it into an embedded image that it will insert into your existing page in any of your various notebooks, which is really a neat feature. It essentially allows you to get around that problem not being able to capture content. Now, of course, there are ways that you can get around that by using things like the print screen tool, but it is nice to be able to actually measure out a specific area of visuals or graphics to be able to see that. Now, as a bit of a demonstration, what I will do is I'll show you how I could add a picture of myself into that example. So you could follow along with me here if you wish. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Internet Explorer. In fact, I'm going to launch a new copy of Internet Explorer. So let me just do that first. I'll just do that manually. So here's a brand new Internet Explorer page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the location of our Twitter feed. So I'm going to basically put in https twitter.com/ and we'll put in a C. I just want to make sure I got it right. So it's CTC Train Canada. I'll learn how to spell it right. There we go. And if we hit enter, what you'll probably see is you'll see all the various things that are there. I'm not going to worry about signing up. I hope they will just let me see it. No, it's asking me to sign in. I don't know if they'll let me do that. Oh, no, maybe. Oh, yeah, here we go. Okay, so yeah, so if we scroll down, you can see that there's some information about me preparing for my OneNote webinar. And you'll notice that a couple of these notations about the webinars that I've been doing today have actually a photo. There's actually a picture of me with me here right now in this location. So if I click on the option to view the photo, right, there is my picture. That's me, and that's where I am. I'm working on my computer and also close to my blue microphone here. And I have my iPad and a few other things close by. And so this is me working on this. Now, of course, if I actually wanted to actually include this as part of my OneNote notebook, it would be a little challenging, although thankfully I could actually just right-click on this picture and choose Save Picture As, and then just insert it as a graphic document, like say a JPEG or a Portable Networks Graphics PNG image. But if I wanted to grab it manually without having to go through all those extra steps, to save me a lot of time, what I could do is I could actually go into my work. Might want to call this something like business photos. So I'll just call it something like photos online. And then if I wanted to insert this as a picture, all I have to do is just choose this option called screen clipping. And then now I have the ability to click and drag, and I can actually select a sort of a very targeted region. So if I carefully trace out where that all is, then it will instantly transfer that as an inserted image. And it will also give me the exact location of where that was. What's really neat about pretty much almost everything that I do in OneNote is that when I add it, it will typically put an exact date and time of when everything was done. So you can see that if I did want to resize that image, that's very easy. It's very similar to what we see in Word. If I click on that actual image, it's a little bit different. You'll notice, of course, that we don't have a contextual tab. We can just simply make some very basic changes to it. If we right-click on it, you'll notice that there's really not much we can do with it. We can't really change the appearance of it very much. And again, these are things that we would really need to do potentially either in a more dedicated image processing tool like, say, Photoshop or PaintShop, or possibly even in Microsoft Word. So you can sort of see the other tools like Word and PowerPoint give you a lot more power. Very limited in OneNote, but just enough for you to be able to do what you need to do to sort of organize your stuff relative to other text. If I click over here and add some text, notice how whenever I add text, it doesn't actually show you when I added it, but if I click on my Insert tab, I do have the option to insert a timestamp, and it would show me exactly when I added all that. So you might want to make a note of that as well. If you're planning on doing very detailed tracking of precisely when you added that item, this is something that I do occasionally when I do consulting work. I've actually taught OneNote for people who use tablets and styli. And this is one key feature of, whenever they're doing things. Whenever, if we're looking at doing things like doing analytical work or things like inspections, we really need to be very precise in terms of exactly when we added this particular text box and wrote all these details, right? So essentially what this does is this tells you when the text box was created. It's not so good at tracking update times, but it is very good at tracking the creation time. So long as people are fairly honest about that, if you need to create a new area or update it, it's much easier to just create a new text area. Once you actually have that text area built, then you can put a timestamp on it, and then you can see that's much more up to date. So there are sort of some tips and tricks and things you can use to manipulate that somewhat if time tracking is a critical factor. But obviously, for the average person, normally you're not going to really bother with that. You can see that the 2:40 p.m. that we see over here, this is really when either when this title was changed or updated, or typically it's usually when we either created that section. Okay, so usually that's a fixed time frame. We could actually change the page time if we wanted to something very, very different if we could update it. But normally it remembers when it was first created. So there are some interesting new features in this new version which you could not do very easily in previous versions, right? So a lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward. It's just a question of deciding how far you want to go with that. Okay. So I'll just unshare just for a second. I'll just turn that off very briefly just to see if there are any other questions. So it says, can a PDF, Excel, Word document be inserted in a OneNote page? Yes, it can. Let me talk a little bit about that. So let me go back to my screen sharing, and we'll return back to OneNote, and we'll try and give you some good examples before we wrap things up for today. So what I'm going to do in here, I already have a sample Word document. I'll try adding that in just a minute. I'll actually just close and save that. So let's start with that first. And then while I'm waiting on that, I'm actually going to create a very quick Excel worksheet. So I'll call this something like sales report. This is very similar to the kinds of Excel examples that I build in a more detailed Excel class, but I'm not going to go through all the specifics of it. I'm just going to create something very quick and sort of dirty here in terms of just something easy to build. So I'm just going to generate some random data very quickly here. I'm also going to build some totals. And I'll just clean up that data and paste it as values. And then I'll put some totals on that just to make that even more effective. There we go. That's kind of cool. So there's my complete spreadsheet. What I'll do is I'll just save that. That's on what they call Feuille 1 in French, but I'll call that Sheet 1. Doesn't really matter how I label it, but I'll just update it accordingly. So I'm going to close that down completely. That's all good. So now I have a Word document as well as an Excel sales document. So let's get that into OneNote. So in here, I have options on the Insert tab where I can either insert this as a brand new Excel spreadsheet or an existing one. I'll choose existing. And typically what this would do is this will pop open a dialog box and it will prompt me for the one that I want to add. So I'm going to go to my desktop and we'll locate that spreadsheet. We'll click Insert. And what we'll do is we have a couple of choices. We can either attach this as a file, we can insert this as a spreadsheet, insert a chart or table. So what I'll do is I'll show you each of these options. I'll click on Attach File first. So when we have the attached file, this is just simply a link to that document. Okay, so if I need to get to it, I don't have to worry about where it is. If I double click on it, I click OK, what it will do is it will launch Excel and will take me into that document. Very nice. Now, if that doesn't work, I can always click on Existing Excel Spreadsheet, click the same sales report, only this time I'll say Insert Spreadsheet. And then what that will do is this will actually click on and insert an Excel object right inside of here. So this is actually an editable spreadsheet that I can work on. And I have this edit option over here that will allow me to go into this spreadsheet and do different things with it. So if I click in here and type in equals sum, this is in fact an Excel object, and I can actually update the information and put in additional totals or other calculations and make modifications to it. When I save it, it's actually going to save it internally, right? So this is actually built into the new spreadsheet. So this is actually an additional spreadsheet. This is a copy of the original sales report. And I believe it's just an extra copy that is unique to OneNote. I'll double check that. I'll go back to the other one that I have over here. I don't think it will edit it. No, it isn't. You can see it's a copy, okay? So notice how that's very separate from the original sales report that I had there. If I had a link, then it would just take me natively into Excel. I wouldn't actually be doing the editing inside of OneNote. Now, let's talk a little bit about Word, right? So in here, we have some different options, right? There isn't one that allows me to easily add a Word document, but there is an option for me to insert an attachment. So this is very similar to working within Outlook. And so if I click on that, I can just go in here and say, let's insert a link to this Word document as an attachment. And then you'll see that I have the option to insert a printout or a file. Now you might want to be a bit careful about this. When you choose the option to insert a printout, what you're actually going to get is you're not going to get the document content. You're actually going to get the document content in its full printout mode. So in other words, in many ways, this is almost like if you were taking the output from something like a PDF, but you inserting that as a printed option rather than as the raw content. In this case, I'm just going to choose Attach File, in which case I would see the icon, just like I did before with Excel. And what's really nice about this is that, again, this is just a linked icon. So if I double click on it, it will automatically open up Word, and it will allow me to change my document, right? So if I say to add more details here, this will actually change the contents of the document. I'll save it. And then because this is a link, I'll just double click on it. You can see that it will just go back into the exact same document with the new content, right? So there is a location for this. If I remove or change the physical location of where this link is going from, in other words, if I move this from its location on the desktop to some other directory or other folder, and it doesn't know where this is, then when you double click on it, it will usually tell you that there's a problem. A lot of the time, just like what you would see in Word or Excel when you're doing linked elements or objects, is it would usually prompt you to say, okay, we can't find sample Word doc, locate it for us please, and click on it so that way we know where that link is. Normally it's pretty good at updating it. In some rare cases, you may find that it doesn't work very well. You may actually have to highlight the icon. If you delete the icon, you're essentially just deleting the link. So all you're doing is you're just simply deleting a hyperlink that's connecting to that document. That's really all it is. There are ways, of course, you can add your own manual links to the internet or to web addresses. And you can also select text and also create hyperlinks that way. So this is no different than if you were inserting hyperlinks in a Word document. So a lot of that stuff is really quite straightforward. The file printout is kind of an interesting new feature. It really just takes the physical printed output and actually embeds it and stores it in the actual document. Okay, so that's kind of a neat feature. I'm not going to go into that now because I don't think we have a lot of printer drivers set up in here, so it might cause some issues. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's just a question of deciding where you want to go. And of course, there are also some interesting options for inserting some space. Because sometimes, when you're clicking on these notes and putting them together, it's easy to run out of room. Okay? So there are a lot of things that you can do with OneNote. I mean, all I've really focused on for this afternoon's session is to really sort of show you some of the kind of the most obvious things that I use and to show you some semi-real world examples. Hopefully this has given you a good chance to sort of get a feel for what is possible using the tool. Okay? So we're coming up on about 10 minutes too. So I'd like to start to wrap things up. If you have any questions, please let me know. I will answer them and take care of them now over the next 5 to 10 minutes. And failing that, if not, then thank you again for attending our free session on OneNote 2013. And we'll look forward to hopefully seeing you on a future session, or perhaps if you're in the Ottawa area and you would like to stop by, then I will hopefully see you in one of my classes. Take care and have yourselves a great afternoon.